Hey everyone, today I'm making the biggest and most complex cookie I have ever baked and decorated. It is a replica of a psychedelic 60s concert poster, so let's get into it. Cookie Smut. Hey everyone, my name is Shauna, aka Cookie Smut. I make videos about baking and crafting. If that sounds fun, you should subscribe right now. Today I am making a replica cookie of a concert poster. Headlining is Eric Burdon and the Animals with support by Mother Earth and Hourglass. The concert took place in October 1967 at the Fillmore in San Francisco, California. I made this cookie as part of a collab on Instagram. It's called Collab of the Decades. Every 2 months, a bunch of cookie decorators all make a cookie based off of a decade. This month, March 2021, we are doing the 1960s. This cookie is probably the largest cookie I have ever made. It was 10 inches by 14 inches. Now, I didn't look this up till later, but the original posters for the Fillmore are actually 9 inches by 13 inches, so I actually made my cookie bigger than the original posters. I didn't factor in original size at all while deciding how big to make my cookie. I wasn't really going for, accuracy. Really, the biggest factor was how much detail there was and how small or not I thought I could accomplish that detail, and so I made it accidentally 1 inch bigger than the original poster. So this black Silpat mat that you see me using is a perforated baking mat, and I just bought this and I was so excited to use it for this project in particular because a perforated mat, as the name suggests, has holes in the bottoms. It has a completely open, albeit small, mesh. And those holes help air circulate around the cookie as it bakes, and that is going to in turn provide more even baking. The bigger a cookie is, the harder it is to get an even bake. Oftentimes the edges get crispy brown while the center is still underbaked. But as you'll see right now, I had such an even bake. Everything is kind of this beautiful golden brown, including the bottom. So gorgeous. I love this perforated mat. I'm going to be using it as much as possible from here on out. I used my projector to trace the design onto the cookie. I did that off camera, and now the Royal Icing Marathon begins. It took me a while to come up with an idea for this collab, but I actually went and visited the site of the original Woodstock last October and remembered that was in the 60s, so I decided to go for a psychedelic, hippy-dippy theme. I actually originally wanted to do a poster from Woodstock that I saw at the museum there, which is a great museum, by the way. I loved it. Definitely spring the extra $5 for the augmented reality iPad experience that you can rent. Very fantastic. Highly recommend. But anywho, there's a really cool poster that we saw in the museum there. But honestly, that poster was probably going to be a little bit too intricate for what I wanted to do for this collab. So I went and looked at other psychedelic 60s posters, and I remembered another trip to another museum that I went to that I really enjoyed, which was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. I don't know about you, but when I previously thought of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I always thought it sounded kind of cheesy because the idea of giving rock and roll, which is all about this like free spirit, anti-establishment kind of energy, and then building an entire like corporate cheesy museum thing, Hall of Fame, like that's for sports, not for rock and roll. So I always thought it was kind of cheesy, and I went on a business trip, and my coworker who wanted to go was excited about it, and I was like, But when we went, yes, the Hall of Fame part of the Hall of Fame is kind of cheesy, but there's also this huge museum attached to it, and it's just filled with music memorabilia. And they have some really, really good pieces from all sorts of super famous rock musicians from all the different subgenres and all the different eras of rock and roll. It's actually really cool. And when I went there, I saw all these psychedelic 60s posters. I love them so much that I took a bunch of pictures of them. So when I remembered that those existed, I knew I wanted to pick one to do for this collab. All of the psychedelic posters from this portion of the museum were from the Fillmore in San Francisco, and I had a bit of a moment in the museum because I actually was already familiar with the practice of commemorative posters at the Fillmore because I used to live in San Francisco and I've been to shows at the Fillmore. The Fillmore is famous for every show coming with a free commemorative poster, but I had no idea that that practice actually originated in the 60s with these psychedelic designs, and I just felt an extra connection to that installation at the museum. I chose a poster from a show featuring Eric Burdon and the Animals. Honestly, I picked this poster for the aesthetics and not for the band involved. All of the posters that I loved the most from the museum all had this style of, taking the lettering and embedding it in the image of the poster. And I think that's really cool. I love that they, kind of like graffiti, they're really prioritizing aesthetics and it looking cool over readability, over legibility, and I admire that. And honestly, another big part of me choosing this specific poster was also the feasibility of being able to replicate it in royal icing. The words in the bottom right corner were so small that, as I mentioned before, I already made the cookie an inch bigger than the actual posters were in real life, and it was still kind of a struggle to make sure that I kept all the details and they didn't run together. Icing all of this black was actually pretty difficult. So on the design on the poster, all of the black is one continuous shape. Typically when flooding a cookie, you try and flood one continuous shape all in one go, but just given how much detail there is, especially in the lettering in all of this black, I knew that just wasn't going to work. So my strategy was to split it up into sections and to draw the boundaries around those sections at the narrowest lines. And that just meant that the seams between sections would also be at the narrowest point and be the smallest seams, thereby making it seem as smooth as possible, even though ultimately this flood was not super smooth. At the end of doing all of this black, I realized what I had was essentially a giant cookie coloring book page. Unfortunately, coloring it in with oral icing is a little bit harder than coloring in a regular coloring book page, but I did find it as relaxing. Definitely had so much fun digging more into some of the history and culture around the late 60s hippie stuff, especially after that trip to Woodstock, where while we were touring the grounds and the museum, we actually met someone who was there, and he was so excited to tell us about his experience. I do wish, though, that I could still sit down with someone who lived in Haight Ashbury in San Francisco as well. I grew up in the Bay Area, but not in San Francisco. From a young age, I was always kind of obsessed with San Francisco, and especially with the Haight Ashbury days. I just thought it all sounded so cool, and I wanted to be cool, so I just idolized that place and that time. Haight Ashbury in the late 60s, the summer of love, free love, dirty hippies, music, drugs, the Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin. I just thought it all sounded really cool, and I always knew that I wanted to move to San Francisco when I got a bit older, which I did. I haven't lived in San Francisco for 6 or 7 years now, so it's kind of fun to do this project and think about the Fillmore and my days living in San Francisco and how it used to be my ultimate dream. So even though none of the music playing in this video has anything to do with the bands in the poster, because I had to just find royalty-free music, I did listen to the bands while making this cookie, and I sure did have plenty of time to dig into their catalogs, because this cookie took forever. And I have to say that I actually like the bands in reverse order of how they're billed. So I actually like Eric Burdon and the Animals the least. The Animals, you might be familiar with from doing House of the Rising Sun, which already is a song that I don't really care for. And Eric Burdon and the Animals is, I think it's the same people, or roughly the same people, just under a different name, because this project was like a little bit darker and a little bit more psychedelic. I just found the songs to be a little bit too repetitive. Next build is Mother Earth, which is a much smaller band. I'm guessing that they were pretty local to San Francisco, because they're actually second build on a lot of these posters that I see from the Fillmore, so I feel like they probably stayed kind of local and were well known in that San Francisco late 60s scene. But yeah, definitely much smaller. But their music is a little bit more bluesy, a little bit more soulful, and I like that a lot better. And female vocalist, gotta love that. And then the last band build is Hourglass. If you want to go look for them, it's Hour Space Glass, not Hourglass, all one word. And they're my favorite because they're an R&B group, and R&B, I think, is just my favorite genre, or, you know, top 2 favorite genres of all time. Everything from Motown to SZA. I love it all. Love me some R&B. And now that all the flooding is done, I turn my projector back on so I can paint on this beautiful lady's face with some edible paint. And there you go. There is my cookie concert poster. Just some good old-fashioned cookie decorating. Just lots and lots of it. I had so much fun with this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Hey friends, thanks for watching. Do all the things. And see you next time.
This is the biggest cookie I have ever made.